Hello everybody and welcome back to Module 3 on this Jumpstart on ASP.NET Identity. We are getting some good information from Adam Tuliper. Thank you very much, Adam.
Thank you, thank you.
And we're going to continue on. What are we looking at now? Oh,
we are going to
that's
talk
what
about
we're looking at.
external login providers is what we're going to talk about today.
I think this is a fun topic. I really love getting out of just the first-party authentication and getting into the third-party.
It's a new world, right?
It is.
10 years ago, we didn't have any of this. Now you think about,
wasn't here.
Right? You want to log in to use your Facebook logins. We see that all the time. You're on a news site, and rather than having to register with a news site, you can just register with Twitter, Facebook, all these other services. So we're going to talk about how to use some of those services today. Let's check out our module overview here. When we talk about external login providers, we're going to be covering what is OAuth, since a lot of that works with OAuth behind the scenes, and it's a big mystery to a lot of folks. Some of it's still a mystery to me, so I'll tell you some of the stuff that I know and how I piece it together. And how does Identity use OAuth and integrating with other social providers and other providers. We're going to actually look at one with Azure as well. What is OAuth? OAuth is a protocol.
What does that mean?
So it's a method of communicating. It's a predefined format to communicate with other systems.
So it's not necessarily a library that you have to download and use.
Nope.
Not
Although there are libraries.
Sure.
Yep.
Okay.
It's a defined protocol on how to communicate to. The basic idea is to allow you, the user, to authorize, even authenticate with some remote system and not have to share the credentials with somebody you don't want to. So you happen to be on that news website and they say, hey, you can post a comment here, but you have to sign in, create an account on our site, or you can use your Facebook, right? It's easy. Click, click, type. I'm done. I'm using my Facebook account and I'm posting some comment in the blog, right? It makes it really easy to do. So I don't want to share my credentials with your application, my website, the news website. Facebook's got them. I don't need to give them to you. And so that's where OAuth comes into play.
And it's actually hugely important if you are providing some sort of a service or a website or a web application online, guaranteed some subset of the potential visitors or users of your service are going to be seriously concerned about privacy, and they're not interested in giving credentials to yet another service. And they may just opt not to do it.
Absolutely.
But if they know that when they come to you, they don't have to think about whether or not there's a trust relationship here. Do I know the organization? Do I know that the developers aren't going to kind of swipe my password on the way in? Then there's a much greater likelihood that they're actually going to sign up for your service, and that's what you want.
Absolutely. So let's talk about then why you would use OAuth. You touch upon some of the reasons there, and it allows your application to easily accept other providers. So it's low friction, right? If you have a website and you want to accept other users on there, if they have yet another login to enter in, I use KeePass to store my logins, and it just grows and grows and grows because, I try to mix up my logins and passwords. And as everybody should do as a good security practice, you're all not sharing passwords and logins between websites, right?
Right.
The idea here is it uses an existing account. You don't have to provide credentials to the system that you want to use, the app you want to use. It could be a mobile app, it could be a website. So it allows your application, OAuth allows your app to request resources from some server. Let's say you want to go to Facebook and request some resources, and your application is going to request them on behalf of me. So you can say, we've all seen the systems you go on and you register for Facebook access. So let's say I go on to some news website again, as my example, and I want to register to leave comments on their blog. And I go ahead and I authenticate against Facebook, and it says, this application can read your Facebook profile. Yes. This application can have access to all your friends. Cancel. It allows you to see within a limited scope of what that application can do. And just because you allow that application doesn't give that application free reign, right? It has potentially a limited scope as to what it can access and can let you know what it can have access to. And that's one of the great things.
You have more granularity as a user.
Absolutely.
Deciding what it is that you're going to allow.
More granularity.
And actually, if you're not using third-party authentication and you're going directly to the service, you have none of that granularity. You've just authenticated with them, and everything that you give them is available to them, your email address or whatever. When you go to this third party, you can say, I only want to use this as login. I only want to use Facebook, for instance, as my authentication means and not anything else.
Yep, absolutely. I don't want you to have my credentials.
Yeah.
Leave me alone.
Yeah.
It's just easy too. It's a lot easier for the users, right? Virtually everybody has either a Facebook, Microsoft account, Google login, and they can just use those as opposed to having yet another system. So how does identity in ASP.NET use OAuth? Here's a basic flow of how OAuth works.
Now this isn't necessarily ASP.NET identity using OAuth. This is just how OAuth, the protocol, works. Is
yes,
that right?
Yeah, good clarification there. So this is kind of as a high-level overview how ASP.NET works, but also how OAuth works from a high-level overview. Depending on the version, there's OAuth 1, OAuth 2, and you can actually break this down into 4 separate parties. But this is kind of a good high-level overview that makes it simple to understand. So Jeremy, let's assume you are this suave-looking guy on the left here.
Let me put my sunglasses on.
Your sunglasses on, and you've got the beard growing.
Let me grow a goatee.
We should have all dressed like this guy today. So you go to a website. We'll call that the client application. That's this guy here in blue. And rather than having to give that application credentials, it in turn can go off to some service. We'll call that service here Facebook. Now there's a couple different reasons for that. One, you might just want to authenticate with your client application, and that's it. You don't ever want to access Facebook, technically. You just want to use it as a login. That's one scenario. But kind of piggybacking on that is you want to log in using your Facebook credentials to Facebook, but you want to give that application maybe access to stuff in there. Maybe it's a website that can take your Facebook pictures and do something really cool with them. So it needs access to those pictures. So 2 different scenarios here. One, you just want to log in and you don't want to give some website your credentials. You authenticate, authorize with Facebook. Another scenario is you're actually logging into an app and you want that app to do something with your information, and so it can share that information and you can approve it too. So first thing that happens is user goes to your application, and your application then talks to the service. Again, we'll call it Facebook in this case. And to the authorization server over there that says, hey, by the way, I've got this user here. Can I have permission to send them over to you? And the service replies back, says, why certainly. Here's a token that user needs to come talk to me. So I know it came from you. That's when you get redirected in your browser or in your client app to, let's say, facebook.com, and you see it pop up. This application wants to have access. So the user is essentially going right to the provider. They're no longer in your application anymore. Their browser, let's assume it's the browser here since we're talking ASP.NET. The browser is now on facebook.com. The user authenticates there, logs in, and they get that little pop-up that says, hey, and we're going to see that. Do you want to allow this app to do X, Y, Z? Sure. An access token is then granted to your client application. Now, anytime your client application wants to do anything with Facebook, it uses that token to talk back to Facebook. So it requests something from Facebook with that token to its resource server, and then Facebook's resource server responds back with whatever that resource is, assuming that you have that token. Make sense?
It does.
So OAuth is kind of this, you start reading through the protocol, and there's all these complicated concepts. In a nutshell, this is basically what's happening. Now, what does ASP.NET store in all of this? So your ASP.NET user login table, that tracks the provider name and actually has a provider key in there as well. So this guy right here, ASP.NET user logins. You have your login provider, and that is a key. I'm sorry, that could be like Facebook, Google, and then you have a provider key, which is some number that represents that provider, and your user ID, of course. And that links you to ASP.NET users. So notice here, there is a link to a local system. What's happening here is your Facebook token is not actually stored, but you do get some information that's stored about your user account here. Again, we are not storing that Facebook token, and also we are not storing any kind of password for you. The key is that ASP.NET user logins table. All right, let's look at integrating with other providers here. So out of the box in ASP.NET Identity, you get integration with a Microsoft account, which uses OAuth 2.0. You can integrate with a Google account, a Facebook account, and Twitter. Those are all out of the box. You can integrate with Azure Active Directory. Then that is a slightly different process because it's actually a little bit easier too, and we'll look at how to do that. And that uses OpenID Connect, which works on top of OAuth 2. So let's look at a demo of adding a Facebook login. So let's open up Visual Studio. We'll create a new project. We'll do this all from scratch. Call this Facebook web example.
Now keep in mind the example that Adam's walking you through here is right out of a project template, and he's stepping through it. So you've got this same project template in your Visual Studio.
Yep, this makes it really easy. Click OK. I'll just choose an MVC application. Same thing applies to the other templates as well. Web Forms, MVC. Now I'm going to stay with this here, individual user account, because it's still storing a little bit of information locally. Creating this project just like we did before. All right, there we go. Now again, remember I mentioned earlier you need to run your application, so essentially this database here gets populated. Notice we don't have a database here. Let me F5 and run this. And I'm just going to register a regular user account. So as it stands right now, this is just the same template that we've looked at before. Register that. Our database is going to get created. When it comes back, we are all good. Now notice, if I log off and I go to log in, look at this template here. Use another service to log in. There are no external authentication services configured. See this article for details on setting it up. So if you forget everything I've said here today, you can go to that article and check it out, although it's really easy. I think you're going to remember it. Go back to Visual Studio. Let's stop debugging. Notice, as I mentioned earlier, that database has now appeared. That's there. Let's look at that guy. It's everything we've seen before. As of now, we have just an entry in ASP.NET users. Everything else here is going to be blank except for migration history. So what we're going to be using in this demo is this guy right here. ASP.NET user logins, login provider, provider key, and user ID. So to get this puppy going, if we scroll down to our startup auth, and recall that in the first module I mentioned that this here deals with initializing those OWIN libraries. That's that security middleware. That's something that sits kind of in the pipeline and looks for the required information for Facebook, for example, and handles it all for you. So we need to configure that down here, and it's actually all commented out already for us. Use Facebook Authentication. Perfect. Well, great. What's my app ID and what's my app secret? All right, let me show you where you get that and how you create that. Going over to, let me close some of these out. Facebook.com. I've logged in with my account, and here's some of my applications here. And I do realize that I'm showing you my application secret, which is typically a no-no. However, I'm just dealing with just a local host site here. So you create a new app on Facebook. I've got 3 on here just for demos. So you add a new app and you fill out some details. What's the name of the app? Contact email. And what's your URL? Now, because I'm testing this locally, notice I'm just using a localhost URL. So clearly, if this is a production website, you would use www.jeremy'sawesomepictureapp.com, something like that. That domain probably exists. Somebody probably has it. Everything's taken nowadays. You create that, and this is what you're going to need. So this key, this app secret, we're going to come back over here and paste that in as our app secret. Our app ID, I'm going to copy that, come over here, paste that out here. I save that. Easy enough so far? Control S, F5. Okay, now when we go to login, look what shows up. In the upper right-hand corner here, use another service to log in, Facebook is there. If we enable our other providers here, that shows up there. So let's go ahead and search for this here. And we can see that that code, so all I did here was I copied this out just so I could find where in my project that code is, use another service to log in. We go over here, here it is. It's in our external logins list partial.cs.html. It's a partial view in MVC. Kind of like a user control, if you may, in web forms. Just a little piece of a view that gets rendered with something else. And here, we're getting a reference to our OAuth context, authentication. We're getting all of our registered authentication types. If we have more than one, well, let's say if we have 0, we simply display that message we saw by default. There's nothing set up. If we have more than 0, then we go ahead and we enumerate each one and list them out. Template code, that's actually already there in your project. It's disabled by default because we haven't registered this, so that's all disabled by default. So the template code is there. You just need to do this to get it to work. All right, so let's actually go ahead and register and see what happens. I'll F5 that again. Now, the first problem I'm going to see is, notice my URL up here is, if you can see it, it's port 53863. The problem with that is, if I look over on Facebook, I have a different port. This URL must match exactly, or you will actually get an error. Let's see if I can actually get that error to happen. Let's log in. Use another service. Yeah, see it right here? Given URL is not allowed by the app configuration. It must match the website or Canvas URL. Well, that's why, because my port, my URL didn't match what Facebook has. So let me just go back to my home page here. And let's go back and so that's 53863. We need to change that to match Facebook. So I'm just going to copy that out. Go back to my web project. And what I need to do in my web project is change that port. So if you have a bunch of web projects that are trying to do this, you might want to come up with a better solution here, because this is specific to this one application. So when I look at this web app, I go to its properties, I can see that that's running at 53863 right here. So you can change this. You could use, if you knew what your test website was, you can change this up a little bit. You can use a host file in your local system to override the name. You can do some kind of configuration stuff. In that case, I would probably host an IIS, and I would create an entry in my local host file that said something like my local IP address points to www.awesome.com. And that way, when I go configure my Facebook application, I could type in www.awesome.com here. And when I test it on my local system, it just works. That's the advantage of the host file in the system. If you guys don't know what that is, that's this guy right here. So that path, if you missed that, was Windows System 32 drivers etc hosts. And the host file, that's known to guys in the networking world for a long time. You can basically come over here and just say, superawesome123.com. Doesn't matter if that domain exists or not. Whenever you refer to that on your local system, this is going to override. Essentially, it's going to look at your local system first to see if it understands that before it goes out to the net to do a name server lookup on it. So that's one way that you could do that. You could point your local IP address to look at this name. And so when you hit that name in your browser, it's going to stay on your local system. But we're going to keep this right here. We're just going to use this localhost stuff. It's the easiest for me to debug with. So localhost, I copy this URL out. I'm going to go back in here, and I paste that. And when I save this, I think I already have this registered with another app on the system, so it's probably going to tell me. Actually, nope, this has not been configured yet. Perfect. Oh yeah, here it is. It's mapped to a different application, a different sample app on this system. Would you like to remap it? Sure. If this is your first time doing it, you won't see this. This is only because I've run this demo on the system before. It says, hey, that URL is pointing to a different application on your system. Do you want to remap it to this one? Why, certainly, thank you. So all I did was I changed the URL to match what Facebook's expecting. I come over here, I log in. I'm not going to touch this at all. I'm going to use just this. Super Picture Bestie Friends site will receive the following info: your public profile. Now note, it doesn't say it's going to be able to get all of your friends, all of your pictures, your firstborn son, and all of that added jazz here. So it's limited in scope. And I can say, review the info I provide. Look at that. Tells me my profile picture, 21, just some basic profile information. You know what? That's okay. That's all good. Redirects me back to my account now. Back to the web application now. You've successfully authenticated with Facebook. You need to create a local ID to associate with that user. So I'm just going to say, now you could change this up. Maybe you didn't want an email and you just want a user ID. You could do that too. So I'm going to associate this with that user. That's all I do. I'm not providing any credentials to my local system. I just have an email address on file.
Now, somebody was asking about this. What if I authenticate by way of Facebook one day and then Google the next day? I have the ability as the application developer to make sure that I handle those correctly, associate those correctly by way of the user's email address, so that whichever system they log in as, they authenticate by, I'm recognizing them as the same person. Is that correct?
Correct. I think you'd have to do a little bit of work on the back end there. Typically, I think, if I recall, systems that support multiple providers, if I remember, on a lot of them, of course, there's custom implementations. You choose one or the other or this one, right? You do this, you authenticate, it comes back, it verifies your profile information. So you could store that information multiple ways, but I think you might have to do a tiny bit of legwork on the back end to support the multiple providers on there.
Yeah.
No. In this case, that should actually work just fine. I'm thinking of more advanced scenarios. Reason being is, if we look at our database schema here, if we look at this guy right here, we can have multiple logins per user ID. Right there. So this is the table that holds our external providers: Microsoft, Google, Facebook. There we go. So we can have multiple providers for one user easily in this. This actually already works on there. I was thinking of some more advanced scenarios. So that should work fine out of the box.
Can I try another question on you? I don't know the answer to this one at all. I'm not too familiar with Facebook's platform, but somebody's asking about whether or not, is there Facebook integrated login that does not require the Facebook app platform to be turned on? Does that make any sense to you?
That I'm not sure on.
Okay. All right.
Let me authenticate again here. There we go. There's my email address. Log off. Now if I add any other providers into there, so let's check that out here. If I go back to my startup.auth, I'll just do something fake here. Log in, and now we see that we have a second provider that shows up here. Easy as that. Now, one of the things that we don't do is we don't store the tokens that come back from Facebook by default. So this is used for basic authentication on a remote system. If you want to use what Facebook returns and start querying Facebook data with that, a couple different ways to do that. One way, if you want to do it from the code in your website, they've got a JavaScript API. The other thing that you can do is access. I have another sample here. We won't build this up from scratch because it's a little bit more advanced. Not a whole lot though. So if I look in my controller, account controller, there's a method in here, Facebook info. So this application, same thing. You register with Facebook, but we need to store that Facebook token. And if I look also, this one does it slightly differently as well too. So let me go to the other one so we can compare and contrast. Notice how simple this code is here. Use Facebook authentication. We give an app ID and an app secret. Boom, we're done. It just works. Now, if we want to go a little bit more advanced, and we need to store that token when it comes back, those options that we initialize with, use Facebook authentication rather than just passing in the app ID and the app secret like we did here. We can pass in this object, Facebook authentication options. And we can say what kind of scope we're requesting. Now, by default, you have access to the user's profile. I think you also have access to, with the version 2 of their API, the friends that use this application. Not all of their friends. Facebook changed that with the second version of their API. You have access to what other friends use the same application that you're on right now. So you're saying here some kind of permissions that this application is using, your app ID, your app secret. The important part here is this callback right here. This gets called when Facebook essentially says you are authenticated. And here we are grabbing that Facebook token that's coming back, and we're storing that so we can use that later on to make additional requests against Facebook to get data. Why do I want to do that? For this demo, what I'm going to do is I'm going to authenticate with Facebook, and then I'm going to grab some of my profile information off of Facebook. So this is where I'm storing that token, and there's some integrated code here to store that into the database as well. Not just here, throughout this project. That's why I said I wasn't going to build this one up from scratch. Again, all of this code will be available, and this was a sample that I got off of the ASP.NET repository. They've got a bunch of great samples on there as well. Actually, this Facebook sample is on one of the team members' repositories, but I'll have a link up to that as well, and all of this source code you can check out. Now, let's look at the other thing here. The other magic was in our account controller class, Facebook info. We need that access token, and so all we're going to do is query for that access token. So we're looking at the user's claims. Remember, this is a claims-based system, so we are storing that token. Let's close out some of this. We are storing that token in the claims. A claim called, remember, it's a key value. The key is Facebook access token, and we're storing that access token coming back from Facebook. Here, we're using that token to make a request against Facebook, and we're using the API. This API, all I did was Tools, Package Manager Console. This was an install package Facebook. That's what gave me this SDK right here that we're looking at. So this code is not there in the default template. If I want to query against Facebook, then I install the Facebook NuGet package. Since that font might be a little smaller, let me increase that. Install-package Facebook. You don't have to put the capital A like I did. All right, so we've got this Facebook client, and we're giving it the access token. So that class is going to do the communication for us. Facebook has an API defined on their site. /me/feed, all of these different things. If I want my picture, I'm going to call this one. So I'm grabbing that information back from Facebook, my name, my locale, my last profile updated time, and my picture URL. And I'm just going to return that to a web page, to a view, so I can see it. So let's see what happens with this. Let me make sure I'm running on the same port. 62054, and Facebook required 62098. I can actually just do this, 54. I can change it on the Facebook side too. All right, let's go ahead and run this. Clear those breakpoints. Okay, log in. I'm going to do this a little bit trickier here, just to be sure, because I've already logged in. Let's open up a separate browser here. I'm going to open up Chrome, just to make sure I'm not sharing any of those same cookies. So log in, use another service. I'll use Facebook. Thank you very much. Okay. This will receive the following information. We saw that already. Okay. Now here we go. We're adding that claim back. This is what Facebook replies back with, this big access token here. And that's needed for future requests to Facebook resources. Clear all my breakpoints. There we go. We successfully authenticated. Please use a username. And we'll just call this, just for giggles here, Adam Tuliper 5. Got a lot of breakpoints in this project. Perfect. Now this guy up here, Facebook info, that was that method we were looking at, where I query using that Facebook NuGet package. Step through this, that was the code we just looked at, where we just reference Facebook's API. We get some data that comes back. We've populated that into here, our locale. Let's open that again here. We've got our locale, our name, the picture URL, the updated time. And let's see what that looks like. There we go. Oh, the layout's a little bit messed up here. I've got to fix that. But you get the idea. I brought back my name, the locale, which is a little overlapping here, but we saw that data all come back here. If I refresh that page, step over that, we can see all that data here. So the data is all correct, even though my web layout was a little messed up. Simple as that. So that is how we integrate with one, a social provider, and secondly, how we can take that one step further, get the access token, and then use that in the future for requesting resources from Facebook on behalf of that user. All right, next. Jeremy, this is one of my favorite demos because it uses Azure. Azure as a cloud platform, I think, is amazing. I think we do releases of features on there every 3 weeks now. It's growing.
Always changing.
It's always changing,
it's
always
awesome.
growing.
And there have been a lot of questions in the chat room, so your timing is excellent.
Yes. All right. So what we're going to talk about here is using single sign-on in a web application. I've seen many organizations. I've worked at many organizations where you have all these different little islands, all these applications, and they all have their own little SQL databases everywhere. Some might share one database that's multi-tenant, in other words, supports different applications, different companies, different users, etc. But single sign-on is great because you can point it to some other area, and that handles all of the credentials for you, and then you can sign in once, have access to a bunch of apps, or again, like I mentioned earlier, you can use those same credentials to access multiple applications without having to share them with the application itself. So in this case, we're going to keep credentials stored in Azure. Azure is going to use its Active Directory there to know all about those users, and our application will just query that. And we can actually create another web application that queries that same data, and another one, another one. We can create 10 web applications probably really fast that all look at that Azure data and all provide the same user experience to log in. So let's check that out, shall we? I'm going to go over to, I almost said Facebook because I just closed Facebook out. Go over to Azure here, to Active Directory. All right, this is the Azure portal, manage.windowsazure.com. If you haven't checked out Azure, you can get a free trial. Sign up, go to windowsazure.com and check it out. But what I've done in here, there are many features. We are just going to use Active Directory for this one. So we'll do this all from scratch. We're going to create a new directory. And we can see that's the default there. We're going to create a new directory. We're going to create a new directory. The name, and I'm going to write this all down as I do this, super new directory. Super new directory. Woo! Let's do the ultimate with, keep track of all this information here. Super new directory. Domain name, we'll call it super new directory. Oh, somebody's already used that. Get the heck out. Oh yeah, well watch this.
Super new?
Aha! Select country. I am in the United States. So let me copy this out so I don't forget that. That's funny, somebody else has super new directory. Oh, test data.
It's actually, I just beat you to it.
Oh, nice work. I used to love, past organization I was at, there was large databases with user info, and the testers would have the most creative names they would put in there for
for test users.
That was great, yeah.
Yep. I don't know if everybody's aware of this. Let's just go ahead and jump over to mine. This is kind of fun, actually. There is a website called the Fake Name Generator. Have you ever been there?
I don't think so.
This is hilarious because it feels like you're actually looking at a real person here. Look at this. We've got, let me refresh it so we make sure we don't have anything we don't want to show. But look at this. We've got a phone number, email address, username, password. We've got social security number.
Oh my goodness, that is class.
And you can click here to actually show it.
Can you export that from there?
And then you can actually not only export it, but you can request huge dumps of test data.
That's neat.
Yeah, it's actually really fun. And everything on here is is completely made up. It does not at all map to people in real life. If it does, then you are the victim of some incredible change.
That's pretty cool. All right, thank you. I've seen some test data sites. That one actually has the coolest layout. I like that.
Yeah.
You just get that one snapshot there.
Yep.
All right, so in Azure here, we're going to go into my super new directory, Uno, and go into users. And I'm going to add a user. This is the first step you must do. A new user in the organization. And this one we'll call my global admin. We need a global admin first. So let me write this down here. At superdirectory1.onmicrosoft.com. So we're going to create a user called my global admin. Next, my global admin, first and last name. Display name, my global admin. What role? Global administrator. I'm not going to fill out the alternate email address here, and I don't need to check off multi-factor authentication. I'm going to click on next. Oh, I do need that there, so we'll do my address. Okay, create it. We're going to get a temporary password now. So I will take that out, save that. Alrighty. Now with that in mind, let's go back to Visual Studio. We're going to open up a new, we'll do a new one here, new project. Same thing, ASP.NET Web Application. We'll call this Azure AD. MVC application. Now here's where it changes. Change authentication. Organizational account. And notice it says for applications that authenticate with users with Active Directory, Microsoft Azure Active Directory, which we're using here, or Office 365. So we're going to use Cloud Single Organization, but notice you can do on-prem or multiple organizations. And the domain. So something.onmicrosoft.com. I'm just going to
perhaps. I mean, that might be your company's, your organization's actual domain, but
yes, you can customize that, absolutely. I'm going to use the default one here on Microsoft.com with mine. Access level, single sign-on. Or do you want them to be able to read this directory data or read and write your directory data? In this case, I do not. I'm not changing any of the Active Directory data behind the scenes. I just want default authentication rolled up here, so I'm choosing the defaults here. I'm going to click on OK. I have to log in with my global admin now. So I come back here, my global admin. Oops, so it's my global admin at my directory name. Change password. Alrighty, please re-enter that password here. There we go. Notice we're all set here. Authentication, we see supernewdirectory1.onmicrosoft.com. So to recap, I've created my directory. I created a global admin in that directory. It gave me a temp password. And then once I did this, it prompted me for that global admin, and then it prompted me to change my password. All I've done so far. Click OK. Voila. There we have it. All right. Simple as that. We created our template here. Let's go ahead and run this. And this starts up immediately. This application is protected, so we integrated single sign-on here. So it says, all right, who are you? Now, I don't want to use my global admin. We want to assign users to our application, right? The global admin is a global admin. This is not a regular user. So I'm going to go back to Azure here and create a user. So we're going to say add user, new user in my org. We're going to call him Jeremy. Jeremy Foster. He's a user. And again, we get that temporary password. So I'm going to take this out here, copy and paste this info just so it's a little bit easier for me. Alrighty. So going back to my application here, I want to log in with Jeremy and that password, and being that it's my first login, it's going to ask me to change that password. So here we go. Got my username here, Jeremy at Super New Directory 1, and the password. Change password, there's my old password, my new one, I'll throw a 1 on the end, make it easy. Okay, please re-enter your password, that makes sense. You got to enter your new password. And did I stop my application? I did. So this actually came back to my application, but I had stopped my application. So let's refresh this again. Let's paste it. Okay, Jeremy, and we need your new password, which was this with a 1 on it. There we go. Just like that. So you are authenticated against Active Directory?
Yes.
All right. Now let's look at your application here. This is different. This is not the same sort of layout that you get with the typical identity in ASP.NET. One could even argue that this fits in as kind of an overall umbrella for authentication in your application outside of identity. This uses these tables here. So there is something to note that if you are going to migrate this application up to the cloud, when you migrate this, you actually will need to select a database in the cloud to migrate this to. And you can do that when you publish your project. You can specify your database options and all that to publish to the cloud. Just one thing to be aware of, there's a little bit of information that's stored locally here. And that information, this does need to get replicated if you happen to host in the cloud. And it does require a database just to track a little bit of this local information. All right, so that was it for the Azure Active Directory. Now, show you how easy this is again. I want to create a brand new web application. Let's create another one. A new project. We'll call this Azure AD2. I've got another application I'm adding to my organization. I want to use that same single sign-on again. So go back to Notepad here, copy my directory name. Same thing like we did before. Click OK, and there it goes. And voila, we have our project. We debug our project. Again, brand new web project, second web project pointing to that same Active Directory up in Azure. Use another account. We're going to use Jeremy's account here. And your password. Just like that. So in under like a minute here, I brought up a whole new web application that is authenticating against your application that's up there in the cloud.
Now let me make
Active Directory in the cloud, I should say.
Yeah. Let me make one thing clear for folks based on some questions. When you're doing authentication against Active Directory in the cloud, Azure Active Directory, a likely scenario, not a necessary scenario, but a very likely scenario is that you're dealing with a corporation who already has an on-premise authentication solution. They have Microsoft's Active Directory installed, which is very popular. And they have a bunch of users and groups defined in Active Directory, and that's what they're authenticating against. Well, what you do here is you go ahead and set up your Azure Active Directory. You do a one-time synchronization of all of those users, and then kind of an ongoing live synchronization, a live connection between the two, such that when the IT guy adds Joe, the new employee, he gets synchronized up into Azure Active Directory, and he's now Joe in Azure Active Directory, and we can authenticate against that user account, again, by way of one of these modern scenarios like Twitter or Facebook or something like that. So a pretty cool story because it keeps these two in sync, whereas before they were kind of locked in behind the firewall of the company for good reason.
Absolutely. Make sense so far?
I think so.
The Azure, I think, is my favorite part because it's so easy just to spin it up, and then you have all your applications pointing to that one and authenticating against it. It makes it really, really simple.
And by the way, the first tier of Azure Active Directory, you can just go sign up for. Like, go get yourself the free Azure subscription in general, and then you can go create yourself an Azure Active Directory and just start playing with that. There's no charge for it.
Very cool. Well,
should we go ahead and take a meal break?
We should. I actually hear my stomach growling a little bit over here.
Yeah, me too. I'm looking forward to it. I hope you guys are too. So we'll see you back in about an hour. See you back in.